What we use every day says a lot about us. Now, think about something you threw away being discovered a century later. What stories would it tell? Tonight, we're digging up some of Cincinnati's history with a story about violence and concealment discovered in a privy shaft. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful episode of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities Presents the Hometown Haunts podcast. I am your host, Kat Clogo, and tonight with me are Christina Wald and Jen Kohler. They'll be on shortly. First, social media. You can follow us at Cin Cabinet Curio on Twitter, at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities on Instagram, and every year, every year. We've gone on for over a year. But every week, we also want to hear your ghost stories, creepy cryptids, and interesting fringe history from your neck of the woods. And you can send that to hometownhauntedmail@gmail.com. And you can join our Facebook group at Hometown Haunts, and you can share your stories and chat with people in real time on Facebook. We're an official podcast that can be heard wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you, Jen. Find us by searching Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities, and please rate and review us there so other spooky history lovers just like you can find us. Link in the show notes. And for those of you who are not from Cincinnati, Cincinnati is spelled Cincinnati. We have no episode next week, however, because of the superb owl. I mean, the Super Bowl. The Cincinnati Bengals, made it to the Super Bowl, and we are very, very, very proud. So everyone will be watching the game, and we won't be recording a show. But we'll have more exciting shows later this winter and into the spring. Christina would like me to note that the Kickstarter goals will be shipping out later this week, and those of you that got sketches will be getting them a little bit later than that. Also, we are doing a third installment of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities Comics Anthology, and it's open for submissions right now. We have the topics for this anthology, and they are the Darby Lee Cemetery in Mount St. Joseph, Ohio, Witch Hill in Alexandria, Kentucky, the Delta Queen's Resident Ghost, the Trenton Hatchet Man of Trenton, Ohio, the Oxford Light, and the Allendale Train Tunnel in Ellesmere, Kentucky. If you or anyone you know is interested in participating in this year's comics anthology, proposals have been open since January 19th and they run until February 28th, 2022. We're looking for those of you who are an artist and writer or an artist and writer team and have a connection to the Cincinnati metro area, that being Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, Southern Indiana, or the southwest portion of Ohio. Each proposal should be a comic that is between 3 to 6 pages in length, with characters, settings, and a plot summary sent over to us. Sample art is also extremely helpful. I appreciate it a lot. And please also link your social media accounts on the portfolio. Submissions should also be PG-13 or lighter with no not safe for work content, body horror, or gore. This is a paid position and we pay competitive paid rates. You can find proposal submissions on our website, cincycuriosities.com. And our final bit of show news is that you can hear me, Kat, speak at the University of Cincinnati Communiversity on March 15th, 2022 from 6:30 to 8 p.m. That cost is $39, but it includes a copy each of issue 1 and 2 of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities. And this is an opportunity for you to hear me talk about how we find the ghost stories, the research that we do to basically doing the show, and also for the anthology, the research that goes into it, how I find the ghost stories, and the process, the actual artistic process of writing and then turning them into graphic novels. So please join us. There's information in the show notes, I am sure. Also, please wear a mask during the class because I have a yet to be vaccinated toddler at home and I will probably be masking up as well. So thank you for hanging in. That was a lot of show news, but we have a lot going on. Very excited about that. So we have a very excellent guest joining us tonight talking about all things archaeology, and that is Bob Genheimer. Bob is the George Rieveschl curator of archaeology at the Cincinnati Museum Center. He has been doing archaeology of the Cincinnati area since 1974 and holds both a BA and an MA in anthropology from the University of Cincinnati. He was an archaeologist with Miami Purchase Association, now the Cincinnati Preservation Association from 1977 to 1986. He began with the Cincinnati Museum Center in 1990. His interests include pre-contact ceramics and anything related to historical archaeology. Oh, but he brought us a wonderful story tonight. So all of you, will you come back? Come back and join me on this show. Unmute yourselves. Oh man, Bob. As soon as Christina said, "Hey, I have a friend who knows archaeology and works for the Cincinnati Museum Center," I was all ears and curiosity. So, what story did you bring to share with us tonight?
Well, I have sort of a bizarre story tonight, and it's one that I've been obsessed with two major times in my career. Once about 41 years ago when we found this stuff, and then about 10 years ago when newspapers were digitally archived and we could look this stuff up, and we found out all this other stuff, and I came back to it again, and it's absolutely a wonderful story that weds history and archaeology, crime, mental illness, anything you can think of is in this story. And we took us years to figure it out as much as we could, but it's actually great.
Oh yeah, it's I love trash pits. Like I know we talked about before the show. I am a former anthropology. I only have a BA in it though, an anthropologist. But trash pits were always something we talked about in urban archaeology and how they tell the tales of the people who lived in the cities before now and just kind of their everyday lives. So, for our listeners who do not know what urban archaeology or what trash pits or privy shafts are, could you explain to them?
Well, urban archaeology is really the same as prehistoric archaeology. Anything else that you're actually doing it within a city setting, and cities or urban areas are obviously totally different. Every time a building is torn down, we destroy one instance of history and create a new one, which will
Mhm.
be there 50 years from now for somebody else to look at. So they're very dynamic sorts of areas. Privy shafts are one of my favorite sort of contexts. We refer to these as features. There's a number of reasons why privies are so fabulous for anthropology. Number one is they have great integrity. They're usually intact. They're lined. They're there. They're physical. You can go in them and dig stuff up. And although they have a lot of fecal material in them, it's not really the fecal material we're interested in. Although there's a lot you can tell from that, it's the other items that get thrown into it that are really storehouses of historical knowledge. They're also stratified, which means they have layers. And archaeologists love the things with layers because you can control for time,
Mhm.
and everything inside that layer is associated with the other. So we like that. Preservation is terrific. And even if they torn a lot out, some of these privies are so deep that the bottoms of them are still there. And one of the coolest things is associations with real people. So when you're doing prehistoric archaeology or pre-contract archaeology, you can make associations with a village or a people or a culture, but not individuals. Doing urban archaeology or working with privies, you can do that if you have great historic resources in hand with it. There are also great storehouses of knowledge on health and wealth and all sorts of other things that are going on in an area. But what we're going to talk about tonight is the coolest part is what I refer to as aberrant behavior. What we're going to talk about here in a bit is aberrant behavior in any century, whether it's the 19th century, the 20th century, the 21st century, whatever. This is a pretty cool story. And the word privy itself comes from Latin privatus. It means secret, private. The unspoken takes place inside of this. When you think about it, if you want to dispose of something, this is the place to do it in. Out of
Mhm.
sight, out of mind. No one's going to go digging into the fecal material to find what you threw in there. Of course, they didn't take us into account 100 years later to do it. But
No.
so that's why they're great because, and there are other stories behind this policeman story that we can also do.
Mhm.
But this one is my favorite.
Yeah. I'm really curious first, how did you find the privy? Was there a building being torn down and they found it and then they needed to contact resource archaeologists to look into it? Or did somebody stumble into it while weeding one day? Like, how did you find it?
Well, we were working for the city of Cincinnati. They were had like a 4 or 5 block area north of City Hall
Mhm.
that they were going to renovate. And so we went in there to do archaeology. They paid us to go in and do archaeology first.
Mhm.
The privies, there are no standing structures left. There may be one or two in the whole 5 blocks. So they're below ground and they were filled in. So the way that city lots work in Cincinnati and most cities is that the back of your properties abut each other. So on each street, when they come together, that's called Privy Row. Obviously, you want to put an outhouse as far away from the house as possible, which means all those privies are on that back property line on either side of the lots.
Mhm.
So they're fairly easy to find. And also, the bottle collectors and other people had gone in and dug some of them, so we knew they were there.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, it's always fun with the houses around here because 'cause I'm on the east side, but an older part of it, and I'm like, "Yeah, there's probably your parking pad is on top of wherever your privy was." And my neighbors are like, "Wow, that's disgusting, Cat. Why did you remind me of that?" But here we are. So, yeah, Jen and I were talking about the stratification of fecal matter earlier,
Oh,
and
gross.
it preserved it really well, unless it was cloth, but that we found a few scraps of cloth. So, yeah, I'm looking through my questions, I'm sorry. Oh, thank you, Christina, for the, stratification of this privy.
We were admiring this diagram earlier.
How long did it take you to actually excavate it?
So the pressure shaft in question, let me think, maybe 6 weeks, 5 weeks, something like that.
Oh,
It's
wow.
so we at the time we weren't really complying with OSHA regulations today. We were actually inside the shaft.
Oh, oh.
So it's not very bright in there. You would have to
Mhm,
try to add light, flashlights. It's very difficult to photograph, and you are actually sitting in it while you're digging.
mm,
So if you can imagine, it's a circular shaft about 4 foot in diameter.
mhm,
So you're sitting on a level and you have to dig, and then you scoot yourself around in a circle. And we
mhm.
were digging in 1 foot levels,
Okay.
but we
Huh.
were also identifying what we call horizons or depositional horizons.
Mhm,
So the upper part of this privy shaft, it started off as brick, and then it quickly there's an image here where you can see it switches to limestone
okay.
as it goes down. This is dry laid limestone, no mortar.
Mhm. Oh,
And the upper parts of these privies are pretty much ash, combustion byproducts from furnace, fireplace, that sort of thing. They had to get rid of that, and they had to fill these privies up by city ordinances. So they did that. Early, about the first half of this one is fecal material.
mhm.
So, in fact, the police material that we're going to talk about is in the very top of that fecal material, right when they abandon it as a toilet,
Okay.
and then use it
Uh,
as a dump for household trash or
Mhm.
fireplace ash and that. So
Hmm.
it's we wore safety lines. Very difficult to photograph because of moisture and fog in it. Using the flash in there is almost impossible.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's the it empties out in sandy outwash because downtown Cincinnati is on an outwash terrace.
Mhm.
So these features are actually dynamic. Solid remains, liquids pass through,
Mhm.
which means that it's not really great for preservation because it's dynamic,
Mhm.
because it's changing.
Mhm.
But some things preserve well. Metals do not. Metals corrode, and we'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah.
So cloth tends to deteriorate, as we'll see.
Mhm.
Um,
So, when you started excavating, you had no idea about the story that would be uncovered. You
no,
just started
no.
pulling artifacts out, like
Yeah.
plates and bottles and
Yes.
buttons and scraps of clothing as you're going down. I like you said, after all of the household remains. So when did you start piecing together the story?
Well, most of it was a little bit later. I don't, if I remember, I don't think we really knew what was going on while we were actually digging it in the shaft. It's kind of dark. We knew we were pulling stuff out. We saw some interesting stuff, but when we got back in the lab with it and started pulling it out, that's when we started to realize that we had something bizarre here, and that it took us a little bit. We have what's left of a policeman's uniform
Hmm.
in this privy shaft, including all sorts of stuff. And I can run through some of the highlights of the pieces that came out of the police material. If you want me to do that, I can
Oh
do that.
yeah, like there were so many things, so many
Yeah.
treasures.
Yeah. So one of the first things we came up with was this um, metal waist buckle. It's a two-piece buckle that comes together. So
Hmm.
a little disc goes inside of a little sleeve.
Oh, there we
Uh,
go. Thank you,
there's
Christina.
yeah, and they say Cincinnati Police on them, or the one we had a P in the center for police.
Hmm.
That was intact. No leather belt, but we found that. Also, a double tube police whistle with a chain.
Oh wow.
And these were the chain. When you see the frock coats, whether it's single or double breasted, the chain is going in between the buttons and the whistle is inside. So it's a two-tone whistle. One whistle means I'm in trouble.
Hmm.
The other whistle means I'm really in trouble. So maybe this was before radios or
Hmm.
phones. It's a totally different world. Policemen were pretty much on their own at times.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh, let's see what else. 27 gilt buttons.
Yeah, that's a lot of buttons.
It is. We discussed this earlier, and that some of them have a P on them for police. Some of them have the seal of the city of Cincinnati that says "Junk to Juven" on it.
Hmm.
Every time you see a city of Cincinnati car, you'll see that seal on the side of the car. We found 12 unfired pistol rounds, both 32 and 38 caliber. A pearl-handled Derringer, we'll get to in a second, which is
Yeah.
41 caliber, and it's loaded.
Oh my.
A bronze medal for Sons of Veterans, and we'll get to how that plays into this in a moment.
Hmm.
Lots of cloth uniform scraps that were sort of bluish black, but very desiccated. They would just sort of break apart in your hands into dust.
Okay.
So they didn't like the atmosphere in there.
Hmm.
2 call box keys. If any of you guys are old enough to remember, policemen, I am, that they used to go to call boxes to make phone calls
Yeah.
before we had radios or cell phones.
Hmm.
We found these keys. A sword pin was in there. Several other buttons that were not City of Cincinnati, but were from elsewhere, which suggested to us that this was possibly a single man who was doing his own work on his uniform and was getting buttons
Oh.
wherever he could. And 2 badly corroded badges, which is unfortunate, but we're pretty sure that they're police badges, but it's very thin metal and they were chrome plated and there was really nothing
Hmm.
left of them that we could tell what was on them.
Hmm.
So a lot of stuff. The only things that we were missing really are the police hat and the nightstick or day stick that they carry.
Okay. Wow.
Everything else seemed to be there.
That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it is.
So, did you? I know you said the badges were too corroded, but were you able to pull the individual's name from any of the artifacts?
Well, that's where we got stuck in this process when we started getting obsessed with it, because at the time, this is back in 1981, we thought, well, who is this policeman? And how do we
Hmm.
find out? So since we didn't know his name, one could sit down and take an entire city directory or 4 or 5 years of city directories and read them from cover to cover. And 5 months later, you may know his name.
Mm-hmm.
We were not really willing to do that.
No, that's painstaking.
Yeah. So we had a lot of stuff that was badly corroded. We started cleaning stuff, and lo and behold, we were cleaning the corrosion off of this one piece, and it turned out to be a rubber stamp. They had metal, wood, and rubber on it, and we cleaned it some more, and the only thing remaining on the stamp was his last name.
Oh, wow.
And his name was Dustin, Dustin. So we immediately went to the city directories. There he was at that address on Chestnut Street. And we could follow him backwards and forwards. He had been listed as a night watchman when he lived at this house. Prior to that, he was listed as a policeman.
Okay.
For about 7 or 8 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a single man. He lived in the house. That had the 2 families in the house. He was a boarder.
Okay.
36 years old, single. So we were correct. He was a single man.
Mm-hmm.
So we finally knew his name and who he was. And then the story got more interesting because we thought, well, let's go to the Cincinnati Police Museum. Let's go to the police archivists.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to them, and they said, oh, let us look this up. And they came back to us the next day, and they said, we don't know how to break this to you, but this guy was never a Cincinnati policeman. Never.
That is really interesting.
Yeah. We said, well, what do you mean? He says he's not in any of the roles. He doesn't show up. We actually looked at the City of Cincinnati annual reports for all those years, and in the end of those reports, they actually list the policeman. In many years, they have photographs of him.
Mm-hmm.
He's never there. So we thought, what is going on? So we finally found, this was back in 81 or 82, we found his father's obituary, September of 1899. And in it, his father said that the obituary said one of his sons was a merchant's policeman, or one of his children. So he was not really a Cincinnati policeman. He was a merchant's policeman, but he had an identical uniform. And that may have been common. We don't know. Unfortunately, we couldn't find any merchant's police records, but now we knew who he was.
How is that different than a Cincinnati police officer?
The merchant's police?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they were essentially appointed by the mayor, and they would guard businesses or private residences.
Okay.
So they would have territories and stuff that they would work.
Like a security guard.
Yeah, and the territory that our Charles is in was in Avondale.
Okay.
So, but we'll get to that in a second. So, but when we looked at the obituary, Charles's father is a really prominent person. He was a Civil War hero. His name was Captain E. Potter Dustin.
Okay.
Although when we found it, I don't think he ever achieved the role of captain in the Civil War, but maybe in the Ohio National Guard or something later. But he was also a very prominent defense attorney. He was the number one defense attorney for people, for murder trials and that sort of stuff. He was well known. And he apparently died of what seems to be a stroke. I think they called it paralysis of the brain.
Yeah.
And so when you think about the dynamics of a father who's a prominent attorney and a hero, and a son who is a policeman, but maybe not a real policeman, but a merchant's policeman, it may be that there was a dynamic between these two that Charles wanted to please his father. So, and then his father dies.
Mm-hmm.
So,
At a rather young age, if I remember the article.
yeah, he wasn't that old, but
Yeah.
and it appears to be a stroke, but
Yeah.
yeah. So up until this point, when we're looking at all this information, it appears to be somewhat of a normal family.
Mm-hmm.
Prominent father. His father had married twice. First wife died. And they had a couple kids. I think 2 of them actually died young from cholera, other things. But that's not that uncommon in the 19th century.
No, it wasn't.
So it seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary until his father died.
Hmm.
And then, as we'll get to in a second, it seems that Charles becomes unhinged.
Yeah,
So
that's a good way to put it.
yeah.
There were more articles about him.
Yeah. So, yeah. And if you want, I can go through those.
Oh yes, please.
It's a
This
very
poor
sort of story.
guy.
And I remember when we found these, when they were brought to us the first time, I was just like pickled. It was like, your favorite TV series, and it ended. Oh, but here's 4 more episodes, and they're going to tell you everything you wanted to know. It's like incredible. So the violence begins in 1900. So approximately 8 months after his father's death,
Okay.
Charles is on his route in Avondale. He runs into another policeman who he doesn't like, actually doesn't like this policeman's nephew, and they get into an altercation.
And this is an actual policeman, not a merchant.
No, they're both merchants policemen.
Okay. Okay.
But let me just make this point, because the policeman he has the altercation with is the private security guard of the mayor of Cincinnati, Julius Fleshman.
Oh my.
So he didn't just pick anyone to have a fight with. He picked, an important policeman to do this with.
Mm-hmm.
They got into an altercation on and off a streetcar. Charles pulls a gun on him. Actually, in the police car, shoots this other officer, but the bullet just grazes him and gets lodged in the guy's trouser.
Wow.
Off the streetcar again. Finally, the streetcar operator and some other people subdue him, and the police come. And thus Charles tried to shoot him again.
My goodness.
So anyway, Charles loses his police powers, at least temporarily. And also, from what I understand, his authority to carry a gun.
Okay.
And is put in jail, we don't know how long.
Huh.
So obviously, there's some anger or some issue going on here.
Yeah, he's not processing the grief in a healthy way.
No, he's not. And then there's sort of a hiatus between the next episode.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 19 months after the first, or at least that's all we know. Obviously, we're relying on newspaper articles.
Right.
And if he did something that didn't make the newspaper, well, we're not going to know.
Right.
So he's back as a policeman, back in Avondale. Same thing happens again. This time he confronts the nephew of the first policeman he shot, who his intended target was in the first place.
Oh.
They get in an altercation. Charles pulls a pistol on him in full public view. People can see it. And, they subdue him, and he runs away this time, and they get an arrest warrant out for him.
Right.
So the third episode occurs the very next day.
Oh.
Quick. Well, because they're looking for him.
That's true.
And they find him in some stables somewhere, I believe, in over the Rhine.
Okay.
And the arresting officer comes in. Charles pulls a gun on the arresting officer. And
brave.
But the officer was able to put his hand between the hammer.
Okay. Yeah.
Prevent it from shooting. And then he got one of these lead-filled things, and they hit him in the top of the head. And Dustin went down, then he got back up and tried to shoot the officer again. He was subdued. And Charles also tore up the arrest warrant, which is an offense.
Uh-huh.
Tore it up in his face. So at this point, he was arrested and taken in. So he was charged with carrying a concealed weapon, resisting arrest, contempt of court for not, he couldn't carry a gun,
mm-hmm.
tearing up the arrest warrant and assault and battery from the day before.
Oh my.
So
That's quite a list.
that's a pretty long list. But he's finally in custody. He never gets out of custody again from that point because I think by then they have figured out that something's not right here.
Mm-hmm.
So, so all this, just when you look at it, this is not what we expected. We thought somebody just retired and threw their uniform in here, but this is an act of concealment,
Mm-hmm.
a serious act of concealment of what's there. We believe that the uniform, all this was thrown in between the last two episodes. Remember, it was the next day.
Mm-hmm.
We think he went home, threw his uniform out into the privy, and then was in civilian clothes and tried to hide, but they found him. So anyway, and then now they want to know what's wrong with this guy.
Right. That's a lot of aggression in a short amount of time.
Yeah, for a policeman. It's not a normal civilian.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets a hearing at what they call an insanity court,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought in some cases might be redundant, but they found him to be not insane. But a doctor said he was probably too dangerous to be at large in the public. So he was sentenced to 18 months at the Cincinnati workhouse.
Okay.
Which he started his sentence. And then 10 months into the sentence, for some reason, we don't know why, the probate court transferred him to Longview State Hospital for the mentally insane.
Huh.
Where he's remained from 1903 to 1933, died at 68 years old, and is buried at Longview.
Okay.
So he died of a coronary, his death certificate says, due to hypotension and senile dementia.
Oh, okay.
So, the story just, it's a sad story in many ways,
Mm-hmm.
but it's an interesting story because of the way we were able to piece all this together. And remember, this is 120 years ago that this happened.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And it's pretty difficult to do some of that. So there are other questions, but I'll let you ask them.
Well, one of the things that strikes me is he could have thrown the clothing into the privy, but it also could have been somebody that he was boarding with. And that's something we really won't ever know.
You mean he may have left it there?
Yeah, he may have left it there and was just such a devious person that whomever he was boarding with was like, no, we don't want any of this, and just threw it into the privy shaft. It's just, I'm just thinking of different scenarios in my head. Jen, do you have any questions?
So many. Yes.
There's a lot to take in. This is a complicated story. It feels like one of those stories that normally would never have been told without just...
Yeah.
We just happened to go through a privy shaft.
Yeah, right.
Do you think he might have been like bipolar or something, and he was just kind of having a mental break from the grief of his father's death?
It's just my guess that may have been a trigger.
Yeah.
I'm not a mental health person, so I don't know. I don't want to make the sort of judgments. I don't think the archaeology or the history is going to tell us that.
Yeah.
I'm just offering it up as a possibility.
Or maybe he had a mental break in the workhouse, and that's why he was transferred to Longview.
Or obviously something happened in the workhouse to force that transfer. But we looked in the records and we couldn't
find anything.
We couldn't find that at all. But we don't know. So the question is he mentally ill? Is it some sort of an anger problem? We're not sure.
Right.
But he certainly wasn't a trusting person when you look at what's going on. And as far as a lodger throwing it in, it's possible, although I'm not sure why they would throw a loaded gun in there.
If I had a gun, I wouldn't know what to do with it, and I would throw it
Yeah.
away as soon as possible too.
Well, it's-
Go
it-
ahead,
it-
Christina.
I was going to say, it seems like there was clearly something wrong with him, or they would have not committed him for the rest of his life. I mean, it's one thing to go to the workhouse for 2. Did you say it was 10 months? But he was supposed to be there for a year.
18
And
months.
then, or sorry, 18 months. And then partway through that sentence, he ends up being committed for the rest of his life. Back then, when you were committed, was that something that the state did, or was it perhaps family that committed you, or was it both?
I don't know, Christina, I don't know how to answer that. And we also, I'm also aware that not everybody in Longview was mentally ill. There were other reasons why they could have been in there that had sort of medical issues that could cause aberrant behavior.
Yeah.
So I don't want to suggest that he's definitely mentally ill. He just was. I like the term unhinged because he seems that's what was going on. But we don't know enough. I always wish I had a photograph of Charles, and then I think about it. And I think, no, I don't want a photograph of him because I have a mental image in my mind, and I don't want to ruin that. You know.
Yeah.
He'll be some handsome guy that I can't put this together with, you know?
Well, it makes me wonder if he had some sort of injury that caused him, or perhaps lead poisoning, or somehow
he got cracked over the head with a lead stick. I think that's pretty significant.
Well, that could have been. I mean, that could have been what started it off. Perhaps brain damage. Brain bleeds, and maybe it caused enough damage that he never was normal again, or something like that.
Or it could have just been a jerk.
Or
that's true too.
Do you ever, Bob, go down like a conspiracy theory rabbit hole with it? Like, since it was, the mayor's coachman or whatever.
Well,
maybe they just never wanted to let him back out because of a political reason, or
the mayor actually signed, and the chief of police signed the arrest warrant for him. The one thing you have to consider, and you guys do Cincinnati history, is this is the era of Boss Cox. And, nobody had any position of political power in Cincinnati without his approval.
Gotcha.
And so one can assume that Julius Fleshman became mayor because Boss Cox wanted him to become mayor. I can't say that for sure. So it's possible if the mayor appoints, that was one of my first things, the mayor appoints these mercantile policemen, and what was he doing that led to all this? But the stories in the newspaper are not that salacious. I mean, they're more of just an anger sorts of thing, and I don't know that has anything to do with the power base in the city of Cincinnati. So
it does make me wonder if Boss Cox knew his father, if there was any type of relationship, good or bad. But also, and I'm not sure if we covered it, if he, Dustin, ever tried to be on the police force and got rejected, and how long did he have any training whatsoever before becoming a mercantile police officer? And what was his history beforehand? Like, do we have any of that information? Maybe from his family, or was he local? Is there a high school yearbook? Were they doing yearbooks back then?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think that far back.
Yeah, did people? I mean, there were public school systems that weren't in place at that point, were they?
True.
I mean, it seems like
it depends on the location. I don't know about Cincinnati.
I mean, it seems like there was something interesting going on. Like maybe he was a heavy or something. Maybe he was carrying out, like you said, orders that he was told, but he was maybe disposed of because he knew something or something. We were totally making this up. I mean, it's kind of like
there's a lot of speculation right now.
Yeah, we're speculating without any facts. But it's really interesting.
How did Cincinnati respond to this? Is there any record of how people responded to this man just having these outbursts and going after the police?
Well, the first newspaper article is sort of frivolous, Christina. If you had looked at it, it talks about, oh, what's going on here? Nothing much, just a row between friends or something.
Mm-hmm.
Your friends shoot you all the time when you have a row, correct? So
Both on and off of a streetcar.
yeah, and it's like, that's just craziness. Yeah,
Then
what
again,
of the night?
what was the environment of Cincinnati where this can just be considered a ho-hum row?
Yeah, I think this is like fodder for newspapers, because
Yeah.
the police who are supposed to protect you are shooting each other.
Mm-hmm.
This would have been a great story. And I love the headlines. I mean, they had headline. Could you imagine being a headline writer in the 19th century? Look at that. I mean, it's
That
like,
would be awesome.
it's sound bites all the way down. There's no real information until you get to the story, but
Nope.
it's to draw you in.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Well,
clickbait.
Yeah, it's no different than today. Like clickbait, think for, what is it? Find out here what foods not to eat.
Yeah.
Oh man, when you read old articles, the way they
no
would,
different,
especially crime,
Mhm.
they are so slanted.
Yes.
It is ridiculous.
Well, when you
Yes.
think about it, that's the excitement you had. You couldn't watch,
Well, yeah.
Discovery Plus.
Some
Well,
of those
no,
are still
it's-
pretty slanted. Those
It's like the
interpretations.
Penny Dreadful things that they
Yeah.
used to do back in the day in the UK.
Yeah.
That's
And
how
that
they
was-
got their entertainment.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder a little bit if maybe there was alcoholism involved as well.
Mm.
Well, you
You
found
know-
a bunch of bottles in that.
Well, that was my
Well,
thought when I
what
saw
type of
those.
bottles were they?
Mhm.
Well, there was, I'm trying to remember, 42 schnapps bottles
Oh,
in and around there, but I
Schnapps
can't
will do
say
it.
that's Charles.
that's true.
There's
shared the-
7 people living in this house, all using the toilet. So I
And
can't say.
disposing of their bottles there as well.
Yeah, so schnapps is one of those. That's another one of these stories. So if you don't want somebody to know you're drinking, you do it in the outhouse. You don't leave clinking bottles around in your
No.
apartment. So 42 bottles of schnapps, which was considered medicinal, but a high alcohol content.
Somebody really loved their schnapps.
Yeah, I can't say it's him.
Right.
Made them feel good. How far did you go all the way to the bottom
Yeah,
of the privy?
20 foot deep.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
Yeah.
And is this the only one you've excavated or have you done more?
No, in that project we did 3,
Wow.
Okay.
including the privy behind the Betts house, which was a double seater.
Oh,
So
fancy.
yeah, it was.
Did it have a
double
partition?
seater.
So
One would hope.
the Betts house is the oldest house in the city of Cincinnati, still standing in its original location,
Oh, wow.
1804.
Wow. I didn't
But-
realize it was that. It's been there that long.
Well, just the front part of it.
Oh.
And if you look, although there used to be a house right next to it, and the house next to it is on the city grid, it's not there anymore. And so the Betts house isn't on the city grid. So the distance between the two houses in the front is like this.
Mm-hmm.
But in the back, when you open a window, there's a brick wall 1/2 inch from you because they're not on the same grid.
Right. Oh.
So, but that house has Procter and Gamble connections.
Okay.
Did you
I
find
think-
anything crazy weird in there? Or
No,
just...
I think if I remember, William Procter bought it for James Gamble's daughter or something at the house.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting sort of a side story, but that was a block to the north of where this one was. And if you've never been to the Betts house, please go. It's a great place.
Where is it? It sounds
It's
like
on Clark. I think it's 416 Clark.
Uh-huh.
So we did a couple places there.
Mm-hmm.
Where is Clark? Is that downtown or?
If you know where the Jewish cemetery is behind Music Hall,
Yes.
I believe that's Clark.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. I did.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because there's a couple old houses that are still, I mean, now have you gotten, because of the nature of our show, have you gotten to do any excavation at Music Hall where they keep finding skeletons? Is that a place you've ever gotten to explore?
No, I have not. You mean Washington Park there, and then
Yeah. Because every time they build something, they find more skeletons. And I wondered if you had
No,
ever been
believe-
involved in anything.
No, we weren't involved in that. There was a consulting firm in downtown Cincinnati who did most of that work. There might be probably some interesting stories in that if you want to talk to them, but we didn't do that. The other thing that's interesting about this Dustin thing we didn't mention is the gun.
Yeah.
So that gun, and I included there's an image of the gun as we found it, and there's an image of what the gun would actually looks like today. So you can see the lead, the white is lead, it's still loaded, single shot Derringer. This has a turn barrel on it. So if you shoot it and want to reload, you have to press a button, turn the barrel, eject the shell, put a new cartridge in, turn the barrel back. So it's pretty, so an image of it. So it's called a Southerner Derringer, although they were made in the North. It was a very popular gun, very small. It's not that big, fits nicely in your hand. This is a very personal weapon. So it's high caliber, low grain. It's got a big bullet, but it doesn't have a lot of power, but it doesn't need to. It's designed for somewhere between 3 and 5 feet.
Wow.
So some people refer to these as like the poker game gun, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You can get up close and personal.
Yeah. So it's an interesting gun to have, because before that, we know he probably had a revolver because he tried to shoot again without reloading. So this gun is a little bit different. It doesn't really allow for, if you don't get something on the first shot, you may be in trouble.
Could you trace this gun back to him, or
No.
just to the location? It's just the location.
But was it found with not the one that's on the screen right now? Because is that a recreation?
That's an actual photo of one of a Southerner Derringer.
Yeah, but the one that
no, that's the actual. The other one, the image is the actual gun.
Yeah, that's the actual one that was found along with the other artifacts from the police uniform and the buttons and everything.
Yeah, it's missing its barrel, interestingly enough. Although maybe it was there and it just had corroded away. But the pearl handle is still very obvious. So you can see what are the inches on there. It's no more than not even, it's 3.5 inches.
Yeah.
The barrel would make it a little longer. It's not a big gun.
Right.
Wow.
It kind of reminds me of the guns that women were picking up in London with Jack the Ripper. Like, there was a few different panics, of course, but women were picking up these single shot guns that remind me like of this Derringer that you are showing on screen. Just in case they were assaulted, then they had one shot and they could run afterwards.
Yes.
And they were keeping it in their purses, and they were small enough to do that.
Yes. And remember also that this is at least 3 guns that Dustin had.
Wow.
His first gun was taken away.
Right.
And the gun when he was finally arrested was taken away. This is another one.
Yeah.
So he's familiar with firearms.
Yeah. Wow.
But the policemen weren't issued firearms back then. It wasn't until the end of the first decade of the 20th century that Cincinnati policemen were actually issued firearms.
Okay. So they had to supply them themselves and purchase them themselves.
Probably. And I'm not sure whether it was one of these things where it was just a wink, wink, you can carry one, or if it was encouraged. I don't know. But I'm sure it was quite common, particularly for night watchmen, probably carried a firearm.
It was probably dangerous.
Well, they're running into those body snatchers that were running around at night as well.
Oh, yeah, we did an episode about body snatchers just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like
gangsters running alcohol.
Yeah, it
Well,
sounds
then
like
that.
late 1800s, early 1900s, Cincinnati was an interesting place.
Though I will say the body snatchers would not be happening because that ended about 20 years before this incident.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I just remembered from our show. But
So this is a little off topic, but Kat, did you post something the other day about the area in front of the museum center is a Potter's Field.
Oh yes, yeah. Just
Are-
learned about that recently, like where
How
the
f-
fountain and everything is was a
Yeah.
Potter's Field at one point. What do you know of that, Bob?
Yeah. Are there still bodies there or bones?
I don't know that much about that. It was a park.
Okay.
And that's, of course, where the very first baseball, if you want to call it a park, more of a field,
Yeah.
was there on the side of where the fountain is.
Okay.
But I don't know anything about. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I don't know. That mean our Potter's Fields were all over the place. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I can look up the article real quick, but
Yeah, I'm like, how did we not know that?
Well, that just shows you how quickly things are forgotten. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about, the work that you do is just how even recent history. I mean, when you think about something that happened 100 years ago, that wasn't that long. But if you have to research about that, it's amazing how much is lost.
Yeah.
Right. And we would be lost without the newspaper archives.
Exactly.
Really? Yeah.
They made the story.
Yeah.
They put the icing on the cake on this story. They really did. And I searched and searched again, and I've searched more and hoping to find something that I missed.
Yeah.
But so far I have not.
That's something we should.
I'm assuming he didn't have any children.
No.
Okay.
Well, that's something we could definitely ask like Greg Hand or ask Jeff Cease to look into too. Mm-hmm. So Bob Jen works for the Cincinnati Enquirer.
Yes.
Oh.
And we've had Jeff Cease on several times. He wrote my story in our comic anthology as well. Mm-hmm. And he does a lot of historical stories for the Enquirer about this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
So this might be something. As a matter of fact, his most recent article that he had, was it last weekend, was about a heist of Rembrandt paintings in the 70s.
Oh, uh-huh. Yep.
I mean, lots of interesting gems in Cincinnati history. I mean, I wish I had a time machine to see Cincinnati around the turn of the century, because it seems like it would have been a very interesting place to walk around.
Yeah, if you ever sat down and read the newspapers, which is a mistake if you just sit in there on microfilm and start reading the newspapers, because whatever you were intended to do won't happen.
Nope.
Because like one day I got there and I was reading. People used to leave little notes about, I saw you on the streetcar and I smiled at you and I just want to let you know and whatever. And there'd be like
personals. Yeah.
Yeah. Like 50 of them.
Yeah.
From men and women. It was how they
would meet.
Yeah. It was sort of text, but not direct. And you had to get the paper the next day and see if this woman who looked like you. And I thought, this is absolutely wonderful.
Do you remember what was that movie with Madonna in the 80s? Suddenly Seeking Susan, or Desperately Seeking Susan. Yeah. I would, when I was interviewed for the Enquirer, almost, it's been a long time. They took me on a tour of the newsroom, and when I saw the photo archives, I'm like, I want to spend all of my time in there. And when I was in the newsroom, I'm not in the newsroom anymore, but when I was there, part of my job was to scan those in. So I did get to go through quite a bit of the photos, but didn't even touch half of what was there. And I can only imagine what else is there. And things have gone missing over the years, but
it's incredibly hard. I mean, that's one reason it's so nice to have the resource like the public library, because a lot of times when these private entities, and we've talked about this before, are doing the archiving, when whoever is funding them goes away, then you lose that archive unless somebody else takes it. And that's one thing that's so valuable about, say any kind of archival work done by the library or the newspaper or the museum center. That's a way to, keep track of this stuff.
The museum center has really exquisite archives as well. In fact, we have a lot of the Cincinnati Post stuff and some other.
Oh, really?
So we're we have terrific archives, both business archives, personal archives. There's a ton of it, and people don't appreciate them until they want something, and then there it is. So yeah.
So, Bob, a couple of times I've been on a tour of the archives there, and it was through work. But is that kind of thing open to the public, or no?
You might be able to schedule a tour with COVID. Who knows?
Right.
But so most of it is in our building. So we're not actually at Union Terminal. We're at a at the corner of 5th and Guest. We have a collections facility there.
Okay.
And
With the big mammoths in front of it, right? Is that place?
Yes.
Okay, I've been there too. It's really cool.
Yeah. So that's the building I work in.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great building.
How do you ever get to just free roam around and look at stuff, or is that a no?
We only have access to our own collections. Or like I said, we never be getting anything done.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's true.
So,
I mean, I didn't want to leave that tour.
No.
It was so cool. The stuff that's there. It's just.
I'm picturing the last scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark with all the boxes.
Better well lit, more yeah. But there is a room, right, with all the creepy stuff in the jars.
Yeah,
There
the Far
is.
Side Room, we call it. Yes,
Yeah.
What's it called?
we call it the Far Side Room, or the
The Far Side
the
Room.
Dead
Oh my
Animals
God.
and Jars Room.
How can you let our sketching group in there to draw that?
Wow. You make the requests, Christina, and I'll see what we can do.
I mean, that
wow.
sounds like that would be really exciting. We're always looking for interesting places. Well, we sketch at the Museum Center a lot. We've
Yeah, I told
down
you
there.
did the dinosaurs recently.
I know
Yeah.
we've done them a couple of times. It's a great location for the urban sketchers to go to. We go to the zoo a lot, and that's a great but during the winter, obviously, it's much more difficult to find.
Right.
But I've heard that you have very extensive back room collections and stuff, and one of the things that's really interesting in the Museum Center beyond the dinosaur bones, I think, are the old models of the city and the old history that the city's gone through. And that's one thing we talk a lot about here is for example, the Spring Grove Cemetery being built after a cholera epidemic and that sort of thing. And that's another thing, thinking about the privies and why they had to be filled in was to prevent people from getting these diseases. And how, what year did Cincinnati probably get proper plumbing? Probably the early 1900s?
So a lot of it was earlier than that, but that didn't mean they actually used them. So they would grandfather in privies, so you could still use them, but you had to have water first. And once water came in, then you would you start to see indoor water closets, and then but the privies were still there, and they were filling them. And I just at right about at this time, 1899 is when they were probably switching to water in the house with water closets, because it doesn't appear to be used as a privy again.
Right.
Unless it's cleaned out. Sometimes they would actually clean these out. But if sometime for fun, look at the health department's stuff in the 19th century and the annual reports about foul and offensive privies. It goes on for pages.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
The rules and regulations, and people were,
Well, it's life or death stuff. People died from
they did.
sewage contamination and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And now you had said that there were thoughts about putting some of this stuff on display.
It has been on display
Mhm.
before. As Kat mentioned, that was really a display on urban archaeology. It went beyond.
Yeah.
So some of the other stuff is interesting, is the medicines, the patent proprietary medicines, which are unbelievable. The titles and the stuff. Marketing didn't start last year in this country. It started a long time ago.
How did they advertise cocaine and heroin?
Yes, they did.
Well, they didn't actually have to. If it had something that was addictive in it, they didn't really have to do much marketing.
No.
It served its
No.
own purpose. It would
Yeah.
make you, it wouldn't solve any of your health problems, but it would make you feel better, and you
Oh
buy
yeah.
more.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
So, out of all your excavations, what is your favorite thing you have found so far?
I would have to say, when we were this is American Indian stuff. We were in the village of Newtown a couple of times where these marine shell gorgets were found, sort of like cereal bowl size, like this.
Mm-hmm.
They slope, and they were engraved, and each one was engraved with an animal.
Okay.
One of them has a mountain lion or a panther on it, which is probably an underwater panther in that cosmology. One had a possum on
I
it
like that.
in profile around the inside. And the last one, which was found during a construction thing, was a composite animal that had it was we believe a Carolina parakeet with panther feet and a tail.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah. So birds have spindly feet, and this thing had a huge foot and,
Wow.
and a tail like a cat.
Oh wow.
So that's like a chimera. It's
Yeah.
joining things together. So
Mm-hmm.
those are pretty cool to see that. But when we did our field school, I ran a field school out on the east side for 12 years, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that was cool to find out there. Working every day, and those were trash pits. Most of that.
Okay.
So, and this fabulous stuff. And when you're looking at something that hasn't been seen in hundreds of years or 1,000 years, and it's still in very good condition. And
Mm-hmm.
So back then, what did they do with their trash? Did they just bury it or burn it?
it appears that most of it was just buried. So they would have pits in the ground for a number of reasons: cooking pits, storage pits for corn or something else.
Mm-hmm.
And when they abandoned them for their original use, they just fill them with trash because, there's the first law of nature. If you have a hole in the ground, you have to fill it. And that's what they do. So,
Okay.
and then we dig it back up. Some of those are stratified as well.
Yeah.
So, but those are, it's a lot harder to control for time when you're doing the prehistoric stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is this Adena or Hopewell?
Later, it's what we call Fort Ancient.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So late prehistoric or late pre-contact. We tend not to use the word prehistoric anymore. We use pre-contact. So, but those are enormous village sites, enormous.
Okay.
And we don't dig ancestral remains. So we try to avoid them if all possible. And if we encounter them, we stop what we're doing. So
it's not disrespectful.
Yeah, we have relationships with 15, 16 tribal partners.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So we have sort of codified our behavior on what we do, which is a good thing. It should have been done a long time ago, but that's what we do today. So, I mean, it's a good thing, and it's a good thing that now we have relationships with these tribes.
Yeah, and that they have input into what's happening with the artifacts that are discovered.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So what else is left to discover? Is there any, or maybe we just don't know what's out there? You got to find it first.
Well, we got to find that parakeet with cat feet first.
Yes. Yes.
Well, it seems like probably wherever you dig, I mean, that's one thing you always hear about in Europe. Whenever they build something new, and it's similar to the music hall situation, they find like excavations of an old city that they didn't know were there, and then they have to stop construction and actually, find out what that is.
Yeah. They don't really have many of those rules here in the U.S. or Ohio. So
Really?
it's up to the good graces of whoever's doing the work typically.
Yeah. I got a family story about that.
Yeah.
And our listeners are just like, seriously, Kat, a family story about this. Does not personally involve me. But my grandfather was not an archaeologist, an architect, and he was charged with or given the opportunity to expand the Ashtabula Public Library, which he gladly did. And he was out there with his it wasn't even an excavation. They had a backhoe and they were just clearing land, and they dug down and they found a bone. And my mom, being around 7 at the time, goes down into the pit because 7-year-olds in large hole of dirt, you're going to go into it. She, without any grace, just takes out a long femur. And she waves it around to the team, and she's like, "Look, Dad, I found a long bone." And according to her, my grandfather just face palmed and was just like, "Okay, we're going to have to stop this for now." He was just like, "We're not going to mow over whomever we've just discovered." And they called in some archaeologists from Cleveland, and they ended up excavating out a skeleton, not full, but as much as they could in 1955. And then also a lot of handmade square head nails and some wood. So they had discovered a family burial plot. Thankfully, that was the only person found, and they were able to continue on later with the expansion of the library.
Right.
But also, that library is also famously haunted. So,
yeah, they disturbed some graves there.
Yep.
Sounds like it.
Wow.
Well,
Cause
like
and
a
effect.
grave.
I said cause and effect there.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we'll be having you on again, Bob. I mean, it's interesting hearing about your take, because we're getting sort of the more, history of Cincinnati sort of. I don't want to say hidden, but it's been more forgotten.
Fringe.
Yeah.
I like the word fringe because
Yeah.
it's there. We know about it, but it doesn't get addressed nearly as often as it really should be. And I love talking about this and archaeological finds in urban archaeology and just discovering the truly hidden history of Cincinnati underneath our feet. So thank you for joining us, Bob.
Thank you for having me.
Anyway, thank you everyone for joining us for another wonderful episode of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities presents the Hometown Haunts podcast. I am your host, Kat Logo, and along with me, Jen and Christina. And also you can catch us on social media at Cabinet Curio on Twitter, at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities on Instagram. And please send in your personal ghost encounters, hometown haunts, creepy cryptids, and fringe history from your neck of the woods to our email address at hometownhauntedmail@gmail.com. And don't forget to join our Facebook group, Hometown Haunts. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Good night and stay spooky. Bye-bye.